We like to think that the weight of our lives falls on the big moments: the argument, the craving, the interview, the exam, the child crying at 3 a.m., the moment where everything tightens and suddenly the question feels simple. Who are you going to be? Are you going to stay calm? Are you going to tell the truth? Are you going to resist the thing that keeps pulling you back? Are you going to become the person you keep promising yourself you won't? Are you going to fail again? This is how the culture teaches us to see choice. The big moment arrives, the spotlight turns on, and whatever you do under that light gets treated as the truth about who you are. If you hold, you are strong. If you cave, you are weak. If you stay kind, you are good. If you snap, you are selfish. If you resist, you had discipline. If you relapse, you didn't want it enough. The moment becomes the test, and the test becomes the verdict. But I think that story starts too late, because the big moment is usually not where the choice begins. It is where everything before it reports what it built. The argument did not begin with the sentence that set you off. The relapse did not begin with the craving. The snap at 3 a.m. did not begin with the crying child. The interview did not begin where you sat down across from them. The exam did not begin where the paper hit the desk. These were the visible moments, the moments where the output appeared, but underneath them was a chain. Sleep, stress, practice, shame, food, recovery, the stories you repeat, the body you ignored, the route you trained, the support you had, or the support you didn't. The system was inside. The conditions that had been widening or narrowing what you could reach long before the spotlight turned on. We put the moral weight on the moment because the moment is the part we can see. The chain disappears. And when the chain disappears, the outlook looks like character. That is the error. And it is one of the deepest mistakes we make about human beings, because choice is real. But choice does not begin where behavior becomes visible. The moment gets the blame because the chain is invisible. And that is the first thing I mean by there is no neutral. And this error is everywhere. You knew better. You chose it. You could have stopped. You could have stayed calm. You could have tried harder. You just didn't want it enough. Those sentences feel morally serious. They feel like responsibility. They feel like adulthood. They feel like the hard truth nobody wants to hear. But hidden inside them is a model of the human being. And the model is wrong. The model imagines a person standing inside the moment, untouched by the body, untouched by history, by the day, by the room, by the systems that trained them, choosing from a full menu. We assume there is patience, honesty, discipline, restraint, repair. We assume they are all available to us in the moment if we just wanted them enough. So that what we choose reveals who we are. That is the hidden story. A person outside their mental state, a chooser outside their body, a self floating above the conditions, selecting from nowhere. The ghost in the machine. And the ghost is convincing because from the outside, the moment really does look simple. Look at how we speak about choice. You snapped. The drink was there, you reached for it. The task was waiting, you avoided it. The child cried, your voice went flat. And the evidence looks complete because the chain was missing. All we can see is the output. And when all you can see is the output starts to look like the person. That is the character error. We make a behavior produced under conditions, and we read it as essence. We see ourselves as lazy, weak, selfish, undisciplined, dramatic, cold, difficult, strong, resilient, patient. We turn our outputs into identities. Then we organize our homes, schools, workplaces, courts, politics, and self-talk all around the identity we think we saw. But the moment was not a clean window into the person. It was a readout of what had been built, what had been trained, what had been depleted, practiced, consumed, what was still reachable, and what had already gone underwater. That does not mean the choice was fake. It does not mean the behavior didn't matter, or that no one was harmed. It means the choice was not isolated. The choice was distributed across the night of sleep before it, across the stress that never discharged, across the habit that had been repeated until it became cheap, across the shame that raised the water, across the relationship that either made repair safe or made defense necessary, across the body that had been holding tension all day, and across the environment that kept demanding expensive behavior while consuming the resources that behavior requires. By the time the moment appears, the system is not choosing from an infinite menu. It is choosing from what is still reachable. And that is the missing variable. We do not only need to ask, why did this person choose? We need to ask, what made that choice available? What made the better choice expensive? What made the worst choice cheap? What did the moment inherit? Because the moment gets the blame when the chain is invisible. And once you see the chain, the whole question of choice changes. Not disappears, changes. The person does not vanish. Responsibility does not vanish. But the person is restored to the right scale. Not a ghost floating above the body. Not a villain revealed by one output. Not a pure chooser standing outside time. A living system with a body, with a history, with trained routes, with a nervous system, with relationships, limits, and agency. But agency under conditions, agency that can be widened, agency that can be narrowed, agency that can be trained, funded, depleted, repaired, and destroyed. That is why the old question starts too late. Why didn't you choose better? By the time we ask that, the important work may have already happened. A better question begins with, what makes better reachable? That is the turn, and it starts with the smallest layer, the ordinary, everyday moments. Start with the smallest version, the ordinary moments, the ones that do not feel important enough to count. The way you breathe while answering your email, the story you tell yourself in traffic, the posture you hold for 6 hours at a desk, the scroll you call a break, even though your body never actually recovers, the apology you avoid because it would be uncomfortable, the walk you take even though it does not feel like it changed anything, the sentence you almost say, then don't, the jaw you clenched or unclenched, the bedtime you protect, the bedtime you trade away, the loop that you interrupt once, or the loop that you let run because interrupting it would take work, the moment you feel small because nothing dramatic happens within them. The moments that feel small because nothing dramatic happens in them. No spotlight, no verdict, no one watching. No clear before and after. But the nervous system is still learning. The body is still adapting. And the route is still being trained. Every ordinary second is casting a vote for what will be reachable when the dramatic moment arrives. That does not mean every second has to be optimized. That is not what I mean. I don't mean your life should become a surveillance system where every breath you take is judged, every rest is earned, and every mistake is evidence. That would just become another form of pressure. I mean something simpler. Nothing your system repeats is neutral. The patient breath is a repetition. The snap is a repetition. The walk is, too. The avoidance, a repetition. The repair. The shame spiral. The late night scroll is a repetition. The moment you let your body soften instead of staying braced is a repetition. And repetition makes routes cheaper. That is what a habit is, not a moral achievement, not a personality trait. A route the system has crossed enough times that it can find it quickly, especially under pressure. That is why the default matters. The default is not the absence of training. The default is the result of the training. When you are tired, stressed, hungry, embarrassed, threatened, or overwhelmed, the system doesn't reach for the thing that you admire most about yourself. It reaches for the route that has been made cheapest, the route with the most repetitions, the route that has worked before. And worked does not mean healthy. It does not mean wise. It does not mean aligned with your values. Worked means it got you through the moment. The scroll worked because it interrupted loneliness. The snap worked because it discharged pressure. The avoidance worked because it gave relief. The shame worked because it felt like control. The performance worked because it kept the room from rejecting you. The old route survived because at some point it solved something. And every time it solves something again, even badly, even temporarily, it becomes a little easier to find the next time. That is why change feels so unfair. You can decide to become different. You can mean it. You can have the insight, write the plan, and then the hard moment arrives. And when the hard moment arrives, the system does not ask what you wrote in the plan. It asks what route is available from here, what has been practiced enough to survive in this state, what is cheap enough to run when the nervous system's water rises. This is why the small moments matter. Not because they are morally pure, because they are training the menu you will have when the big moment arrives. If you practice repair in low-stakes environments, repair becomes reachable when the relationship is under strain. If you practice walking after activation, discharge becomes more reachable before the argument turns into damage. And if you practice honesty when the cost is small, honesty has a better chance of coming when the cost is large. If you practice stepping one loop early, if you practice stopping one loop early, the system learns that interruption is possible. Not guaranteed, not easy, but reachable. And this is where the old model gets change backwards. The culture says, be disciplined when it matters. The framework says, train the route before it matters. The culture says, rise to the occasion. The framework says, you will fall to what has been practiced. The culture says, the big moment reveals who you are. The framework says, the big moment reveals what the ordinary moments have been building. This is the first rung. Before we talk about biology, before we talk about systems, before we talk about politics or institutions or the wider world, start here. Your day is not a neutral container. Your repetitions are not neutral. Your defaults are not neutral. These moments are not small because they do not matter. They are small because they're quiet, but they build the person who shows up when it matters most. The second rung is the body. Because even if a route has been trained, even if a capacity exists, even if you know what you value, you still have to be able to reach it from the state you are in. This is the missing variable. You do not choose from nowhere. You choose from what is reachable. That is why the same person becomes so different. That is why the same person can become so different across a day. At 3 p.m., you hear the criticism and stay curious. At 10 p.m., the same sentence lands as an attack. At dinner, you can be patient with the child. At 3 a.m., after the third wake up, the love is still there, but the warmth is not. This is the part culture does not know how to see. It thinks if the capacity exists, the capacity should be available. You know how to be patient. You know how to apologize. You know how to focus. You know how to listen, how to stay calm. You know better. So why didn't you do better? But built does not mean available. Capacity is what has been built. Access is what can be reached. And the body is one of the main things that determines access. Sleep changes access. Fret changes it. Hunger, pain, shame, breath, muscle tension changes access. The room we're in changes access. A body that is safe, rested, fed, supported, and regulated has a wider menu than a body under threat, depleted, under shame, pain, or overload. That body has a narrower menu. Not morally narrower, functionally narrower. And the system has fewer operations available. This is what people feel from the inside as, I could not think. I couldn't find the words. I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't make myself care. I couldn't hear them. I couldn't start. I knew what to do, and I still couldn't reach it. The old model hears that and says, excuse. Within the body, this is access. Think of the parent at 3 a.m. The child cries. The parent gets up. Nothing about the love has changed. The values did not vanish. The knowledge of what a good parent does did not vanish. The capacity to be warm still exists. It was there earlier. It will probably be there again tomorrow. But in the hallway, in that body, after that night, the warm tone was not reachable. The words may be right. The hands may be doing the task. But the feeling underneath is gone. It's mechanical, flat. The performance of comfort without the access to it. And immediately the verdict arrives. I'm not a good parent. But that verdict is comparing two different bodies as if they were in the same condition. The rested parent against the depleted parent. The regulated parent against the flooded parent. The parent with margin against the parent whose margin has been spent by the day, by the stress, by the buildup. Same person, same love, same values, different access. That does not mean the moment didn't matter. The child still felt the tone. The rupture is real. Repair may be needed. But if the parent wants a different output next time, shame is a terrible map. Because shame says, be better. The framework says, what would make warmth reachable at 3 a.m.? That is a different question. Maybe sleep. Maybe a shift with a partner. Maybe lowering stimulation before bed. Maybe fewer open loops. Maybe a repair the next morning. Maybe a practice for the third wake-up before the third wake-up arrives. Maybe simply understanding that the hallway was not the revelation of a hidden self. It was a readout of access. Think of a pond. It's crossed by stepping stones. The stones are everything that has been built. Your patience, your focus, restraint, empathy, courage, your repair skills, your ability to hold the second interpretation, to pause before the sentence becomes damage. When the water is low, more stones are visible. You cross easily. It feels like maturity. It feels like discipline. It feels like who you are. But the stones are not all the same height. The complex, more expensive routes that we could take, they're very low, easy to be covered by the rising tide. The stones we've practiced over years, thousands of times, they extend above the water. So if we've practiced anger and we have not practiced patience, when the water comes, only one will still be available. Some go underwater. The patient response, the generous interpretation, the flexible thought, the ability to see the other person as a whole person while your own body feels threatened. These are expensive stones. They require margin, resources, access. And when they go under, you do not experience them as submerged. You experience them as absent. The patient response does not feel unavailable. It never appears. The generous interpretation does not feel expensive. It never forms. The better option does not sit there glowing on the menu while you choose against it. Often, the menu itself is what has changed. That is why you knew better can be true and still incomplete. Yes, you knew better. But acknowledging is not the same as access. A body under load does not always reach what the mind knows. This is why the body matters so much. Not as a wellness accessory, not as a machine you are supposed to optimize, but as the condition from which thought, choice, patience, honesty, attention, and repair becomes either reachable or unreachable in the moment. The body is not separate from agency. The body is where agency becomes available. Before you snap, the jaw might know. Before you shut down, the breath might know. Before you send the message that you later regret, the shoulders might know. Before the story forms, the body had already begun mobilizing. The body is the dashboard before the narrator gets the report. And if you can learn to read that dashboard earlier, agency moves earlier too. Not into some mystical space, into the real place where the system gives you handles. The breath, the posture, the walk, the food, the sleep, the unclenched jaw, the repair. The room you leave before the sentence becomes damage. The pause you practice before the water is too high to reach it. This is why the question changes. Not, why didn't I choose better in the moment, but what state was I in? What had my body been carrying? What had already gone underwater? What signal did I miss before the story took over? What would lower the water next time? Because you don't choose from nowhere. You choose from what is reachable. And built does not always mean available. Now comes the hinge. Because once you see that your own prior moments shape the big moment, the next question becomes unavoidable. What about the moments you did not choose? What about the conditions you inherited before the choice ever appeared? If your sleep determines the moment of choice, then the work schedule that stole your sleep is in the moment too. If your stress determines the moment, then your job that keeps your body under threat is in the moment too. If patience determines the moment, then the recovery your life does or does not permit is in the moment too. If your focus determines the moment, then the app designed to fragment your attention is in the moment too. If your self-control is in the moment, then the room, the family system, the school, the workplace, the economy, the relationship, the noise, the light, the debt, the commute, the open loops running internally, the uncertainty, all of it is in the moment of choice too. Not as an excuse, as part of the chain. This is where the frame widens. The moment is not only built by private habits, it is built by the conditions a person is living inside. The room matters. The schedule matters. The relationships matter. The phone matters. The workplace, the school, the institutions, the culture. Not because they erase the person, because they enter the person. They enter as sleep or sleeplessness, safety or threat, margin or overload, belonging or vigilance, recovery or depletion, as practiced trust or as practiced defense, as a nervous system that has room to choose or a nervous system already spending everything just to stay upright. A system does not need to force your choice if it can shape the state you choose from. That is the center of this video. A system does not need to stand beside you in the critical moment and command the output. It can build the conditions that make one output cheap and another expensive. It can train the route, raise the water, remove the recovery, increase the threat. It can fragment attention, withhold support, or reward performance. It can also punish repair, or demand patience while consuming the conditions patience requires. It can demand focus while training interruption, or demand professionalism while creating constant urgency. It can demand self-regulation while removing every place the body might regulate. Then when the moment comes, the system disappears from view. All that remains is the person. The snap, the relapse, the collapse, the avoidance, the failure to start, the failure to stay calm. The behavior appears in the individual, so the individual receives the verdict. But the output did not begin there. The system was in the room. It was just invisible by the time the behavior became visible. Think of a classroom. A child cannot sit still. The cultural model sees the moment. The chair, the worksheet, the teacher's instruction, and the child began moving. The verdict arrives. Defiant, distracted, undisciplined, difficult. But the chain may include a night of poor sleep, fluorescent lights, sensory overload, hunger, a home under stress, the attention system seeking a movement that it needs to regulate. And in a classroom built for stillness, this creates a discipline system that activates threat. The child still moved. The movement still happened. But the movement was not only the child. The room was in the behavior. Think of a workplace. An employee gets short in a meeting. The cultural model sees tone. Unprofessional, not a team player. Bad attitude. But the chain may include impossible deadlines, constant interruptions, unclear priorities, no real recovery. The impact still matters. Repair may be needed, but the sharpness did not come from nowhere. The workplace was in the behavior. Think of addiction. The culture sees the relapse, the bottle, the pill, the screen, the casino app. The repeated return to the thing that hurts. And the verdict arrives. Weak, selfish, irresponsible. They chose destruction again. But the chain may include isolation, shame, pain, trauma, boredom, social threat, a lack of co-regulation, a nervous system that cannot reach relief any other way, and a product or substance that reliably opens a state nothing else offers. The relapse still matters. The cost is real. But the craving was not born in the craving. The system was in the behavior. Think of your phone. The culture says, just put it down. And sometimes that is the right move. But look at the architecture. The infinite scroll, the variable reward, the outrage, the comparison, the notification, the algorithm trained to find the part of you that cannot quite look away. The platform does not need to force you. It only needs to train the likelihood of the next reach. Then, when your attention is fragmented, the culture calls it a discipline failure. But the app was in the moment. This is what systems do. They operate before the moment, across time, across repetitions, across environments. They train what becomes normal. They train what becomes cheap. They train what becomes expensive. What the body expects from other people. They train whether rest feels safe, whether honesty feels dangerous, whether repair feels possible, whether asking for help feels humiliating, or whether silence feels peaceful or threatening, whether authority feels protective or predatory, whether the body enters a room ready to learn or ready to defend. And because all of that happens before the output, it is easy to pretend that it was not part of it. That is the mistake. The system shapes the state. The state shapes what is reachable. And what is reachable shapes the choice. The choice becomes the next condition. The loop is everywhere. In a family, in a school, in a workplace, in your feed, in your city, in your body, in your relationships. There is no neutral because the conditions do not sit outside the person. They become the person's operating state. This is the system layer. Not because the person disappears, because the person was never sealed off from the world. The world has been entering the body the whole time. And once you see that, the phrase becomes harder to escape. There is no neutral moment. No neutral room, no neutral schedule, no neutral feed, no neutral institution. Everything is participating in who you become next. Now we need the guardrails. Because once you see the chain, two misunderstandings can become very easy. The first is fatalism. The second is pressure. And both would break the point. The first misunderstanding says, if the moment was built before it arrived, then maybe I had no choice. Maybe nobody is responsible. Maybe the person disappears into conditions. Maybe every harm becomes explainable. And because it is explainable, it is excusable. This is not the claim. The claim is not that you had no choice. The claim is that choice is not isolated. The choice was distributed across time, across your body, across training, across conditions, across the routes made cheap before the moment arrived. That does not make the action unreal. It makes the action better understood. You still act. You still speak. You still reach, avoid, snap, repair, cause harm. And when harm happens, the harm is real. The person who felt your tone does not need to pretend they did not feel it. The person hurt by your pattern does not need to understand the theory before they are allowed to protect themselves. The child still felt the flat voice. Your partner still heard the sentence that hurt. The friend still experienced your absence. The damage still entered the world. Explanation does not erase impact. It tells us where we might change it. That is the difference. The old model thinks responsibility means finding the guilty point and pressing harder. The framework says responsibility is larger than that. Responsibility asks, where in the chain can this become less likely? What repair is needed right now? What conditions must change? What routes need to be practiced? What support might be missing? What system keeps making this output cheap? Responsibility does not disappear. It moves upstream. This is the first guard. The person does not vanish. The person is restored to the right scale. Not a ghost floating above the body and the world. Not a helpless object moved by forces. A living system, acting, being acted upon, shaping conditions, and being shaped by them in turn. Responsible not only for the visible moment, but for what can be tended before the next visible moment arrives. That is not less responsibility. It may be more. Because now responsibility includes maintenance. It includes repair, practice, design, asking for help when the loop reaches its cliff. It includes changing the room when the room keeps producing the same collapse. It includes protecting other people from your pattern while you learn where the pattern comes from. There is no neutral does not mean nothing is your responsibility. It means responsibility is not trapped inside the moment. The second misunderstanding goes in the other direction. Pressure. If every moment matters, then every moment becomes a test. Every breath, every choice, every scroll, every meal, every conversation, every hour of sleep, posture, thought, every second becomes another chance to fail. That is not what I mean either. There is no neutral does not mean everything is your fault. It means everything is participating. Those are different. A storm is participating. A bad week is participating. A night of broken sleep is participating. So is the child you did not choose to be. A work schedule, a body in pain, an algorithmic feed designed to capture attention. It's all participating. That doesn't mean you caused all of it. It means all of it is in the chain. And seeing the chain is not supposed to make you hate yourself more. It is supposed to give you handles. There is no neutral does not mean optimize every second. Rest is not neutral either. Rest is one of the conditions that make the next good thing reachable. Doing less can be maintenance. Leaving the room can be maintenance. Sleeping is maintenance. Walking without turning it into a performance is maintenance. Letting the body stop is also maintenance. Letting one moment be unfinished so the system can recover may be the thing that protects the next moment from becoming damage. That matters, because if this idea turns into perfectionism, it becomes the thing it was built to fight. It becomes another verdict machine, another voice saying, you should have known better, you should have maintained better, you should have trained the right route, you should have lowered the water, you should have built the conditions. This is just the old model wearing new language. So keep the guard in place. Maintenance, responsibility scales with access. The person in survival mode does not have the same menu as the person with margin. The person with support does not have the same menu as the person alone. The person whose nervous system is flooded does not have the same menu as the person who is rested, safe, and resourced. The person inside a damaging system does not have the same menu as the person outside it. The question is not, what would the ideal version of me do? The question is, what is reachable from here? What is the smallest, honest intervention available from this state, in this body, under these conditions? Sometimes the answer is a full life redesign. Sometimes it's therapy. Sometimes it's leaving, apologizing, a workout, a walk, a meal, a deep exhale. Sometimes it is not making the damage worse for the next 10 minutes. That counts. Because the point is not perfection. The point is direction. There is no neutral means the chain is always being shaped. It does not mean you are always guilty. It does not mean you are always failing. It does not mean you must turn your life into a project of constant self-surveillance. It means the moment has roots. And if the roots are real, then mercy and responsibility both have somewhere to go. Mercy says, the output came from the chain. Responsibility says, now that we can see the chain, what can we change? Both are necessary. Mercy without responsibility becomes avoidance. Responsibility without mercy becomes shame. The work is to hold both. The harm happened, the conditions mattered, the person acted, the chain participated. Repair is owed. Damage. But design is possible. That is the guardrail. And that is what keeps this from becoming fatalism, and what keeps it from becoming pressure. The person is real. The conditions are real. The choice is real. The chain is real. And if we want the next big moment to go differently, we have to stop pretending the big moment is the only place where the work begins. So what changes? If the moment is not the beginning, then the question has to move. Away, not away from responsibility, earlier than blame. The old question is, why didn't you choose better? But that question starts too late. It begins after the water has already risen, after the route had already been trained, after the body had already narrowed, after the system had already shaped the room, after the output had already appeared. This puts responsibility at the moment that might be the least changeable, then demands the expensive act. Choose better, hold the line, stay calm, be disciplined, do not collapse. Do not reach for the old route. Do not become the thing you keep becoming. Sometimes that works. Sometimes a person really can interrupt the pattern right there in the heat of the moment. And those moments matter. But if that is the only place we allocate agency, we will keep asking the hardest moment to do all of the work. And then we will call it character when it fails. The better question is, how can we tend access? What makes the better choice reachable? What made worse cheap? What did the ordinary moments train? What did the body signal before the story took over? What had already gone underwater? What did the room demand? What did the system fund? What recovery was missing? What support was absent? What threat was present? What loop had been rehearsed so many times that it ran before choice could catch up? These questions do not erase the moment. They restore the chain around it. And once the chain is visible, agency changes shape. Agency is not only command in the moment. Agency is stewardship across time. It is the practice of tending what the next moment will inherit. That may mean training a route before the crisis, practicing repair before the relationship breaks, sleeping before the 3 a.m. hallway, eating before the conversation, walking before activation becomes a fight, leaving the room before the sentence becomes damage, or putting the phone away before the feed trains you to keep reaching for it. This may mean making the task smaller before avoidance becomes relief, or asking for help before the loop becomes the only road. Changing the environment before the environment keeps producing the same state. It may also mean looking beyond the individual, because if a system keeps making the worst route cheap, the work is not only inside the person. A workplace that burns people out cannot keep calling exhaustion a personal failure. A school that overloads a child cannot keep calling the child the problem. A platform designed to capture attention cannot keep calling fragmentation a lack of discipline. A family system that punishes honesty cannot keep asking why everyone lies. A culture that consumes recovery cannot keep demanding regulation as if the regulation were free. The reframe is simple. Stop asking only, what kind of person does this? And instead ask, what kind of conditions make this more likely? And then, what conditions would make something better more reachable? That is the practical turn. It works at the scale of breath, at the scale of habit, at the scale of relationship, environment, and systems. But it does not mean the same thing at every scale. At the body level, we may be talking about sleep, breath, pain, food, tension, arousal, recovery. At the body level, we may be talking about sleep, breath, pain, food, tension, recovery. At the habit level, we may be talking about repetitions, cues, rewards, practices, loops. At the relationship level, it might be safety, trust, repair, co-regulation, healthy boundaries. And at the systems level, we may be talking about schedules, incentives, resources, power, design. The pattern repeats. The mechanism changes. That distinction matters because the goal is not to turn the idea into a magic explanation for everything. The goal is to stop amputating the chain. When you restore the chain, the work becomes more precise. If the problem is a loop, build an interruption earlier. If the problem is depletion, fund recovery. If the problem is shame, turn verdict into a handle that you can use. If the problem is threat, reduce it or change the room. If the problem is threat, change the environment. If the problem is a lack of practice, make the route smaller and repeatable. If the problem is a system, stop pretending the individual is the only site of repair. This is what the old model cannot give you. The old model gives you a verdict: weak, lazy, selfish, undisciplined, broken, difficult, good, bad, strong. A verdict feels clear, but a verdict often gives you nowhere to work. A mechanism gives you handles, and the handle is the beginning of real agency. Because real agency is not the fantasy of choosing from nowhere. Real agency is the ability to participate in the causes that shape what becomes reachable next. That is why maintenance matters. It's why practice matters. Repair matters. Rest matters. The systems we're in matter. Not because they replace choice, because they are part of how choice becomes possible. So the question becomes, what am I training? What am I maintaining? What am I tolerating that keeps narrowing me? What am I calling personality that may be a repeated state? What am I blaming on myself that may be a design problem? What am I blaming on the system that still requires repair from me? Where can I intervene before the moment becomes dramatic? Where is the smallest reachable lever? That last question matters. Not the perfect lever, not the heroic in the moment lever, not the lever you could reach if you had slept 8 hours, had no debt, no pain, no fear, no shame, no history, no pressure, no body. The reachable level. The reachable lever. From here, from this state, in this life, under these conditions, agency begins where the chain becomes visible enough to touch. Sometimes that touch is tiny. One exhale, one apology, one glass of water, one closed phone application, an earlier bedtime, a conversation, a boundary, a walk, a redesigned morning. One system that stops demanding where it does not fund. Tiny does not mean meaningless. Tiny means early. And early is where the chain can change before the next big moment arrives. That is the upstream reframe. Not try harder when the spotlight turns on, but tend what the spotlight will reveal. Not why didn't you choose better, but what would make better reachable. Not what does this output prove about you, but what chain produced it, what repair is owed, and where can the chain change. This is where mercy becomes practical. This is where responsibility becomes design. And that is where choice stops being a ghost story and becomes something we can actually build from. So here's the point. Agency is real, but agency has conditions. Choice is real, but choice does not begin where behavior becomes visible. The critical moment matters, but the critical moment is not alone. It inherits the body. It inherits the day. It inherits the sleep, the stress, the route that has been practiced, the shame that has been carried. It inherits repair that happened or did not happen. It inherits your environment. your conditions. The relationship, the schedule, the system, the ordinary seconds that came before it. And then it becomes the next condition. That is the loop. Conditions shape state. State shapes access. Access shapes behavior. Behavior becomes the next condition. And because that loop is always running, there is no neutral. No neutral moment, no neutral room, no neutral routine, no neutral feed, relationship, or institution. Not because everything is your fault, because everything is participating. Every moment is either funding or consuming something, training or untraining something, widening or narrowing something, protecting or depleting, repairing or reinforcing, making one route cheaper and another route expensive. This is why the old model fails. It starts the story at the output. It sees the snap, the relapse, the avoidance, the collapse, the courage, the discipline. Then it says, there, that is who they are. But the output was never the whole person. The output was the visible edge of a chain. So the question changes. Not only what did you do, but what did it cost? Not only what did you do, but what did it cost? What made it reachable? What made it cheap? What made it expensive? What did the body know before the narrator had a story? What had the day trained? What had the relationship funded? And what had the system depleted? What would have changed the upstream so the next critical moment has more to work with? This is where the framework begins. It does not begin by excusing people. It begins by seeing them more accurately. It does not erase harm. It asks what would make less harm possible. It does not dissolve responsibility. It gives responsibility somewhere to land. It does not say the person is nothing but conditions. It says the person is not separate from them. You are not a ghost floating above your body. You are not a verdict revealed by one moment. You are not a pure chooser standing outside time. You are a living system, a body, a history, a nervous system, a set of trained routes, a relational field, a person across time, an organism inside conditions, acting, being shaped, and shaping in return. That is harder than the old model. It is less satisfying than a verdict. It gives you fewer villains. It gives us fewer villains and fewer excuses. Because the chain is visible. You can no longer pretend the moment came from nowhere. That is the burden and the mercy of it. The burden is that your ordinary moments matter. The mercy is that the ordinary moments are where the work becomes possible. The burden is that systems are in the room. The mercy is that the systems can be redesigned. The burden is that your body keeps the score of what you've been asking it to carry. But the mercy is that the body also gives signals, handles, routes, and a way back. The burden is that you are always training something. The mercy is that training runs both ways. There is no neutral. It does not mean every second must be optimized. It means every second belongs to the chain. Rest belongs to the chain. Repair belongs to the chain. Sleep, walks, your breath, asking for help belongs to the chain. Protecting your margin also belongs to the chain. So when the next big moment comes, to not only ask who you will be under the spotlight, ask what the spotlight will reveal. Ask what you are building before it arrives, what your life is training into you, what your body is trying to tell you, what your relationships are making reachable, and what the systems you find yourself within are making cheap or expensive, and where the smallest reachable lever is. Because the deepest form of agency is not just command in the moment, it is stewardship across time. It is tending the conditions from which the next moment will choose. So yes, the moment matters. The argument, the craving, the interview, the exam, the child at 3 a.m. The moment where the culture says, now prove who you are. But by then, the chain is already in the room. The body is already in the room. The training, the systems. And if we want to become better, kinder, steadier, freer, more responsible human beings, we have to stop pretending the work begins only when the spotlight turns on. The work begins earlier, in the conditions, in the repetitions, the maintenance, the repair, the design, and what we make reachable before the moment arrives. That is the heart of this channel. That is the heart of this channel. There is no neutral, because every moment becomes part of what the next moment can reach.